Um, it's actually been like 4 years of marketing cloud, maybe five. 14 years in email marketing. My specialty actually is data relationships, contact builder, data attributes, the way that those all work together with journey builder. So I'm always really excited to talk about the structures that are available in Marketing Cloud. So if you ever have any questions, I'm available on Twitter and LinkedIn and all of those places. Happy to help if you have any questions about Contact Builder in general. Let me share my screen to show a little bit about what we're talking about today, which is this. Okay. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about the context configuration tab in Contact Builder. I don't know if any of you have looked at the documentation for this tab. It's hilarious. And by that, I mean, it's literally copy and pasted just all of the text that's here. There's nothing else. There's no other notes. There's nothing else like that. So there is some other information about contact delete, but besides that, the official Salesforce documentation, this is all you get. So I am happy to talk about this. Let me hold on just 1 second. So the first part about this, I'm going to go through all of the sections from top to bottom. And definitely, I think that the most confusing part about this is the first one. So let me zoom in just a little bit. Okay. So contact ID mapping. Let me make it so that I can also see the call. Hold on. Sorry about that. Let me put this on a different screen. Okay. And do you have you talked about like what the Salesforce subscriber model with the internal contact ID and all that? Have you talked about that yet or no?
We did had a session on that, but yes, kind of we have talked about that.
Okay. Um, so basically, when you go ahead and you make a data extension, which you've already talked about, it has a primary key and a subscriber key, which are different. And then you have in Salesforce.com a contact ID. This setting, this contact ID mapping, it has nothing to do with this Salesforce.com contact ID, which is actually why this gets really confusing because they're called the exact same thing. What this contact ID mapping is speaking of when it says contact ID is the 9-digit numeric value for all of your subscribers. So it's not talking about their subscriber key and it's not talking about the Salesforce contact ID. So what happens is that if you turn this on, not only will it pull the data that you have put into the system, so it would be like normally you would output subscriber key or something like that. This also appends that contact ID field that is generated from Marketing Cloud into your data source when you are extracting it, so that if you are pulling from multiple systems in Marketing Cloud, you can go ahead and tie them together if they would have different keys. An example for that is if you're using Email Studio and you go ahead and you're emailing a certain set of people, and then you want to go ahead and use one of the other studios, you can go ahead and when you do data extracts from those two places, like if you're using Mobile Push Studio, so it's going to possibly have like a device ID or something like that. In the back end of Marketing Cloud, if it knows that they're the same people, they'll both have that same numeric, they'll have the same numeric designation. In general, do not turn this on. I was at the previous company that I worked at. They were talking about turning it on because they had confused it with the Salesforce.com contact ID. And when I tried to figure out exactly what would happen if they turned this on, all I could find with any documentation or asking anybody or anything on Stack Exchange was generally, don't turn it on. There are very few situations where it's necessary, but there are a lot of situations where it can end up being really confusing, especially if Marketing Cloud is hooked up into a Salesforce.com org, because then you're going to have two things that are called contact ID. So, sorry to start this off by something being like, it's very confusing and don't use it. The only reason you would want to use it is if you are looking at Stack Exchange, or you've been talking to Salesforce support, or you've done a lot of experimentation and you actually are like, okay, so this is the solution, this is what I want to do. Or somebody says you need to turn on this value so you can link these values together. But besides that, I definitely recommend against it. I hope that was clear. If it's not, I'm happy to talk about it a little bit more. It's very confusing, so I 100% understand if there are questions, and if there aren't, that's totally fine as well. So does anybody have any questions about contact ID mapping? I am looking at the chat so that way I can see if there's anything there. Okay, so I can go back to that if you do have a question, but generally, they're not going to ask about this on exams, because even Salesforce doesn't have it documented well. And if they do ask about it on an exam, that's a crime. If you're ever in a situation where like you think that this might be the answer, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I've done a ton of research. I kind of can map out how it works, but even still, like, there's no documentation about it. So moving down to contact events, this is a deprecated option. It is one that you should not use because it is scheduled for retirement. Basically, it captures what contacts do, and it just tells you to use Automation Studio instead. So generally, always keep this off. It had to do with kind of, it's like a different way to do click tracking and things like that based on the person. But now that they have Journey Builder and they've changed the way that the event listeners work, so contact events is something that is deprecated. So generally you're not going to be using it. When they went ahead and both rolled out Journey Builder and then updated Journey Builder so that it worked, because when they first rolled it out, it didn't work very well. That is what they are moving to instead. So that has to do with event listeners that are looking for people opening and interacting with messages. There used to be this contact event system that would listen to all of those things, and you would use it with Automation Studio. But now that they are leaning way much more heavily into Journey Builder, that is the functionality that they keep updating. I honestly really love the way that Journey Builder is put together. So I personally don't have any issues with that. But in general, and this is just my advice overall, since it says that it's scheduled for retirement, generally you shouldn't use it. And part of the reason behind that is because Salesforce is really bad about retiring, about how they handle retirement. So they said that they were retiring like classic content for years, and there are still people who have access to that. But they're eventually going to just go ahead and cut it off. And because they already said that it's retired, you don't know exactly when they're going to shut it off. So generally, I just leave contact events turned off. And if you are looking for those events, you can go ahead and use query activities if you're looking for specific system-wide activity. And if you're not looking for that and you're looking for specific activity on an email or in a campaign or something like that, you can use Journey Builder. So are there any questions about contacts events? Guessing no, because it basically summarizes into don't use it. So, okay, so I'm going to move down to data source loading. I will admit I have never used data source loading. And when I Googled it, literally the only thing I could find was the exact same line of text that we're looking at. What I expect is it helps with when Contact Builder, if you have like a really, really complex data model, Contact Builder can take forever to load. Like you literally just sit there for anywhere from 90 seconds to 5 minutes just waiting for it to load. I'm guessing that this is something that will help with that because it only loads the data that you need to see where you are. I have not had to turn it on now that I've moved into an org and a company that doesn't have as complex of data structures. When I was working at the Girl Scouts, we had in our data model with contact attributes, there were 296 attributes. So that took a very, very long time to load. So if you're using a high number of attributes and you're seeing that loading time, you can try turning this on and seeing if it helps. But it's basically for you, and it doesn't change any of the functionality about how Marketing Cloud actually functions. It just changes the way that it loads data for you in specific. If there's any questions about that, please feel free to put it in the chat. And now this is the second complicated part of this, which has to do with contact deletion. So contact deletes, when you go ahead and actually delete a contact, it's not the same as when you like go into a data extension and you delete a person or marking somebody as unsubscribed or like anything like that. Basically what contact delete is it wipes the person from the system, and that means data extensions that they're in, reporting that they're in. So if you delete all of your contacts, all of your reporting, even going back in time, will suddenly be empty. What this is really good for is usually has to do with when there has been a bulk upload or big change in your contact structure and you have to get rid of a bunch of contacts because otherwise Salesforce is going to charge you for them. Salesforce is not great at not charging people for old records or duplicate records. So contact delete is something that is definitely, it is very powerful and it's a little bit scary, but you really should know about it. So the first thing, and you have to be an admin for this to show up at all. Otherwise, I'm trying to remember if it shows up and you can't change it or if it just doesn't show up. I can't quite remember which one it is if you're not an admin. But if you are an admin, you'll be able to actually turn it on and then you can manage the settings. Have you guys talked about contact deletion, or am I kind of covering everything about contact deletion?
Amanda, you will be covering these things.
Great. Okay. There are some other tabs where you can get some info about contact deletion, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't retreading old ground. Okay, so when you go ahead and you go to delete a contact, there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. The first one is when you go to manage the settings for contact deletion, you probably would expect that there would be more than one box. There is not, because contact deletion is it's a multi-step process, but the steps that you as an admin have access to over it are very, very small. So basically what this goes ahead and does is when you go ahead to delete a contact, which I'll show you how to do that in a second, but when you go to do it, it goes ahead and doesn't actually start by just deleting the contact and then it's gone. What it actually does is it takes the contacts that you would have and it suppresses them. So it acts like they're deleted, but they're not actually deleted. And the reason that it does that is it makes it so that you, if you accidentally delete the wrong set of people, you can get them back. So that's what the suppressed state is. The default is 2 days. During those 2 days, if there's somebody that you have deleted, you cannot re-upload that person, their email address, anything like that, until those 2 days have passed. So if, for example, my current clients, they messed up the way that their Marketing Cloud connector worked, and they ended up importing all of their Salesforce sandbox data as real contacts. So suddenly they were getting overage charges. For them, I set this to 0 because they did need a lot of those users still in the system, but they had to have the right contact ID. So they were getting charged for duplicates because their sandbox and their prod is the same. It generally, you don't want that to happen, but we needed it so that it would get rid of the duplicates, but we could still send to those email addresses, even though we were deleting the contacts. So generally, suppressed status, you can't email them during that time, but it does say where they are in the queue. I am going to talk a little bit about another tab related to this. So when you go ahead and you turn on this contact delete setting, this contacts analytics tab will suddenly appear. It will not be there if you don't have contact delete turned on. So because we have contact delete turned on, we can go ahead and they should really call this contact deletion status because it's or contact deletion analytics. I don't know, but it's the only thing that you get about contacts in this tab. It's not about general contacts analytics. It's only about deletion. So when you go ahead and if you have gone to delete somebody, which I'll show you how to do that in a moment, this page will suddenly update with the things that you are deleting. And it actually shows and steps you through the process. So let me go ahead and go to all contacts. Let me zoom out just a second. Of course, you're going to be cut off. That's annoying. Okay, so the way that you delete contacts, which I can actually just kill this 003. So the way that you delete contacts is, you see how there's this 003? There's two options. You can go ahead and actually look up the people you're trying to delete in all contacts. And then you can go ahead and go to this drop down that will appear once you have contact deletion turned on. And you can click it and it will give you the option to delete selected contacts. You also can go ahead and, if you pull up a list, you can delete contacts from that list. Or you can build a data extension that's the people that you want to delete and tell it to delete the contacts from the data extension. Those are the three ways that you can kind of batch together the people that you want to delete. If you just want to delete one person, I would recommend going ahead and just finding them in Contact Builder, all contacts, and then selecting them for deletion. But in this case, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to delete this one. So this is the somewhat scary box that's going to go ahead and pop up when you go ahead to delete a contact. And so what this actually does, and this is one of the very few, not very few, but one of the few places in Marketing Cloud where it really quickly walks you through the actual, like, what is happening. So if you want to know what happens when things are suppressed, it actually tells you that they do not appear in Journey Builder. This phase prevents contacts with the same, by any contact with the same contact key. It tells you what they do in Contact Builder. It tells you what they do in Audience Builder, even though Audience Builder is deprecated and you should ignore it. Tells you what it does with Email Studio. So suppressed contacts don't receive sends or appear in Email Studio. Also makes it so that you can't add in any contact with the same contact key by imports or triggered sends. Goes ahead, says that they don't appear in Mobile Connect, Mobile Push, Group Connect, Einstein. So basically it actually tells you what is happening while they're suppressed. And so if you go ahead and you go to delete people and then you find out you don't want them to be deleted, I believe you can reach out to support, and if it's during the suppression period, they can make it so that it can be undone, basically. But after the suppression period, as far as I know, and this could change, so you can always try and contact support, but I believe that after the suppression period, they're wiped from the system, I believe. So if you go ahead and say delete contacts, you'll get a little thing that says delete contact request submitted. And then under this contacts analytics tab, yes. So suddenly you're going to get this weird bar chart, and what it says is it talks about the actual number. My zoom in and zoom out is all messed up, but it talks about the actual number of deletions that you have available. And if you click, is it contact request status? I can find it. So if you want to see where everything is in the pipeline, if you view your pending deletions, it'll actually show you every request you've made to delete people, and it'll say what their suppression status is and their deletion status. And you can click on that operation and it actually updates to tell you where everything is and when it's going to update. This is actually one of the most informative boxes that I have ever seen in Marketing Cloud. Whenever they designed this, they did an excellent job because it really shows you what is happening across the entire cloud. And actually, if anybody, every once in a while, Salesforce reaches out to practitioners and is like, what do you like most about Salesforce? Or what do you think that we did really well? This reporting is phenomenal. But the one thing to keep in mind, especially if you've lengthened that suppression window, things that you think are going to work, you have to keep in mind that you're suppressing people. And especially if you have really messy contact IDs, like if either you have contact IDs by email address or you have contacts that have multiple IDs, you can run into some really weird behavior where people won't get emails that they're supposed to get and things like that. So that's always something to watch out for if you're in that suppression window. If you have to go ahead and for some reason completely wipe a system and start over, which I did need to do recently with a client, you can set that suppression window to 0, and it just means that they're immediately deleted, like done. The only piece of advice that I think is really, really important to remember, if you are deleting large numbers of contacts, and when I say large numbers, I mean more than 250,000 people, this process does not work well if you're talking about more than roughly 250,000 people per data extension or data source. So in that case, if you need to delete 1 million people, it is better to go ahead and make a data extension, like make one data extension with everybody that you have to get rid of, and then have it go ahead and split that data extension into smaller pieces so that way it doesn't time out and it doesn't fail. When I was working at Girl Scouts, the previous person who was there before me tried to delete like 3 million people at one time. It was kind of a disaster because like some people ended up deleted, some people didn't, because it ended up timing out and failing after it had gotten through a certain number of people, but there was no indication that it had failed or where it had failed. So if you're working with a really big org, I really recommend going about it through making a smaller data extension. The one thing that I will say is, for instance, there's this data extension that says all contacts. This is how you can delete people from data extensions, I believe. It may still be through all contacts, but you can go ahead and open a data extension and use that data extension to delete people. And then it will show you in that contact analytics, like how far through it is, how many people are actually deleted, what's processing, all that kind of stuff. And I think the only other thing to remember is, because this is scrubbing everybody out of the system, the more complex your data structure is, and the more places that these contacts would have information. What I mean by that is, let's say the average age of your contact is 3 years old. You send 1 million messages a week. You send it to all of your contacts. They have mobile push, they're in journeys, they're in a bunch of reports. Deletion does take time because the system is literally wiping out every single detail that they have about these people. So don't be surprised if it still says that it's processing. It'll tell you how many people are now in suppression versus deletion. But it is something that isn't like you snap your fingers and it's done, unless you have a really small group of people or your system is really simple. So if you haven't sent emails before and you're just starting to hook things up and you hook something up wrong, the deletion will go incredibly quickly because it doesn't have to like go through the whole system. if you have a 10-year-old system that was originally from ExactTarget and it has billions of lines in data extensions, it's going to take more time. So I think that that's covering most about deletion. Is there any other questions, anything like that I can help with or I can demo? Because I can go ahead, if you like, I can turn off the suppression period and show you another deletion, or if there's something else, I'll be happy to help. Go back to the contact config screen. Anyway, from where we found the deleted contact track. So do you mean how to see who is deleted? Or is there another? Okay, so yes and no. So what I would recommend, it will tell you how many people have been deleted when you go ahead and ask for a data extension to be deleted. The issue is that once they're deleted, they're gone. So it can't tell you who it deleted because that person doesn't exist in the system anymore. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. What I would recommend is if you do want to keep track of deletions and who you deleted, you can make non-sendable data extensions. So you can go ahead and duplicate a data extension and make it not be sendable, so that you can kind of keep the list that has them in it. And you also can export the people that you're going to delete before you delete them. Besides that, all you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with the numbers of people who have been deleted, but not the actual people who have been deleted. The way that you would be able to find out if a specific person was deleted, like if somebody's like, oh, did you delete me? If you look them up, there's literally nothing. We had in the client that I ended up deleting all of their contacts, when we went ahead and ran like a contact number report on how many like past contacts they had or how many past like email sends or something like that, it completely like it takes out all activity. Oh, right. And the important thing with that, it also removes unsubscribes, because basically it's contact deletion makes it so that it can be GDPR compliant, which in GDPR, you have the legal right to ask to not be tracked, and you can tell somebody to remove all of your data from the system, and it goes ahead and actually deletes all data from the system. So before you go ahead and delete anybody, especially if you're doing a bulk delete, I deeply recommend exporting all of your unsubscribes. And if you have multiple business units, also the subunit unsubscribes, so that way you can load them back into the system, or have like where you keep track of the people who make GDPR requests, you can go ahead and put their email address in there or something like that. Because if you completely delete them from the system, it does delete their unsubscribe, which means if you accidentally re-import them and they have unsubscribed, you have no record of that. So they will start receiving mail again. Obviously, you should, everyone should have such a grasp on their data that they never do that. But that's not how real life works. there can be accidents. We're doing a lot of this manually. There isn't a lot of documentation. Being perfectly blunt, a lot of Marketing Cloud is kind of flying by the seat of your pants and learning as much as you possibly can. So that's the one thing to really keep in mind, is that it does also delete their unsubscribe. So you should back it up if you're doing any sort of mass delete. And you can reload them back in if it's not for a GDPR request, if it's because you're doing something in the system. You can just reload back in those unsubscribes, and I believe they'll still count as contacts, but there's going to be way less unsubscribes than the contacts you're getting rid of. So, and the other thing that you can do is, if you're trying to get rid of old contacts that don't engage anymore and there are unsubscribes, you, instead of putting them in as unsubscribes, you can also suppress them instead, so that way they don't count towards contacts. So does that answer your question? Okay, great. Does anybody else have any questions at all? I am happy to talk through anything in Contact Builder, but especially the contact configuration page. It looks like there aren't any questions. So I can go ahead and hand it back. My Twitter is @Lindenfelder. Please feel free to follow me. Feel free to ask questions. I'm also in the Email Geek Slack and the How to SFMC Slack. And I will help anybody, especially if you're wanting to nerd out about Marketing Cloud. I love Marketing Cloud. It's my jam. I'm happy to talk about it with basically anyone. So